The thunder that shook the tin roof of Amara's one-room shack seemed to echo the fury in her landlord's voice as he hurled her few belongings into the muddy street. "You have 3 minutes, woman. 3 minutes before I call the police." His words cut through the rain like a machete through sugarcane, each syllable dripping with the contempt reserved for those who dare to be poor in a world that worships wealth. Amara's hands trembled as she clutched her swollen belly, 7 months heavy with the child whose father had vanished like morning mist the moment he learned of her condition. The other tenants peered from behind cracked doors and dirty windows, their eyes filled with the same mixture of pity and relief that it wasn't them standing barefoot in the storm, watching their life dissolve into the hungry darkness of Lagos night. But as the last of her possessions, a faded photograph of her mother, a worn Bible, and a small wooden carving of an elephant her grandmother had given her, landed in the growing puddle at her feet, something extraordinary happened. The child in her womb began to move, not with the usual gentle kicks she had grown accustomed to, but with a purposeful rhythm that seemed to pulse in harmony with her heartbeat. And then, clear as the church bells of her childhood village, she heard it, a voice soft yet commanding, speaking not to her ears but directly to her soul. "Mama, do not weep. The ancestors have not forgotten us. Tonight, our journey to greatness begins." Amara's tears mixed with the rain as she looked around wildly, wondering if desperation had finally driven her to madness. But the voice came again, warmer now, filled with an ancient wisdom that seemed to flow through her very bones. "Trust me, Mama. I am more than the child you carry. I am the key to a treasure that has waited 1,000 years for us to claim it." 3 days Amara wandered the unforgiving streets of Lagos, her feet raw and bleeding, her dignity stripped away bite by bitter bite, as she begged for scraps from vendors who looked through her, as if she were invisible. The city that had once promised her everything now showed its true face, cold concrete and colder hearts, where hope went to die beneath the weight of indifference. She had tried everything, pleading with distant relatives who suddenly couldn't remember her name, sleeping in doorways until security guards chased her away, even standing outside the office building where she once cleaned floors until her pregnancy became too obvious to ignore. Each rejection felt like a small death. Each turned back another nail in the coffin of her dreams, until she found herself sitting beside a garbage dump on the outskirts of the city, watching vultures circle overhead and wondering if they could sense her approaching surrender. It was then, as the sun painted the sky the color of dried blood and the stench of decay filled her nostrils, that the voice returned with a force that made her gasp aloud. "Mama, listen carefully. Do you see the old baobab tree standing alone on that hill?" Amara's eyes followed an invisible guide until she spotted it, a massive, ancient tree that seemed to dwarf everything around it, its trunk twisted and scarred by centuries of storms, yet standing proud against the darkening sky. That tree is older than the city itself. Beneath its roots lies the entrance to a path that your great-great-grandmother once walked, a path that leads to riches beyond imagination. "But first you must prove your faith." The voice paused, and Amara felt a warmth spread through her chest like honey in her veins. "Tomorrow at dawn, when the first light touches the tree's highest branches, walk toward it. Do not stop no matter what you see or hear. The spirits of our ancestors will test your resolve, but I will guide you through. This child you carry is no ordinary child, Mama. I am the chosen one, born to restore our family's lost glory and lift our people from the dust of poverty." Dawn came like a reluctant witness to Amara's desperate pilgrimage, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson as she began her trek toward the ancient baobab. Her legs, weakened by days without proper food, trembled with each step, but the voice of her unborn child filled her with a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Remember, Mama, what you see may not be real, but what you feel in your heart is truth. The ancestors will try to turn you back, but they are only testing whether you are worthy of the gift that awaits." As she drew closer to the tree, the very air seemed to shimmer and dance, and strange sounds began to echo from the surrounding bushland. The laughter of children who weren't there, the whispers of voices speaking in tongues she had never heard, and beneath it all, a low drumming that seemed to emerge from the earth itself. When she was still 100 yards from the baobab, The ground beneath her feet began to change, transforming from red dirt to what appeared to be a carpet of human bones that crunched and shifted with each step. Amara's rational mind screamed at her to run, to abandon this madness before she lost what little sanity she had left. But the voice in her womb grew stronger, more insistent. "Do not fear what you see, Mama. These are the bones of doubt, the remains of those who turned back when they were closest to their destiny. Step on them. Crush them beneath your feet. Show the ancestors that you are different, that you are willing to walk through the valley of death itself to claim what is rightfully ours." With tears streaming down her face and her heart hammering against her ribs like a caged bird, Amara pressed forward, each step an act of faith that defied every instinct for self-preservation. The bones dissolved beneath her feet like mist, and suddenly she was standing before the baobab tree, its trunk so massive that she couldn't see around it, its roots digging deep into the earth like the fingers of some primordial god, grasping the very soul of Africa. The baobab's ancient bark felt warm beneath Amara's trembling palm, pulsing with a life force that seemed to recognize her touch and welcome her home. As her fingers traced the deep grooves and scars that told the story of countless storms weathered and seasons survived, the tree began to respond in ways that defied everything she thought she knew about the natural world. A soft golden light emanated from within the trunk, growing brighter with each passing moment, and the ground beneath the massive roots began to shift and separate, revealing a staircase carved from living stone that spiraled down into the earth's mysterious depths. "This is it, Mama," the voice of her child whispered with reverence that made her soul tremble. "This is the gateway our ancestors used to travel between the world of the living and the realm of infinite possibility. Many have searched for it. Few have found it. None have been deemed worthy to enter. Until now." As Amara descended the glowing steps, the walls around her came alive with moving paintings that seemed to breathe and dance in the golden light. She saw her great-great-grandmother Yemi, a woman of legendary beauty and wisdom, leading a group of villagers through the same passages during the Great Drought of 1847. She watched in awe as the images showed Yemi discovering chambers filled with gold so pure it seemed to capture and reflect the very essence of sunlight, enough wealth to feed and clothe every person in a dozen villages for 100 years. But the most incredible revelation came when she saw what had become of that treasure, how Yemi had used it not for personal gain, but to establish schools and hospitals, to dig wells in parched lands, and to build bridges between warring tribes. "Your ancestor was chosen by the spirits to be a keeper of this sacred wealth," her unborn child explained, its voice now carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. But when the colonizers came with their guns and greed, she hid the treasure and bound it with powerful magic, decreeing that only one of her bloodline, proven worthy through great suffering and unwavering faith, could claim it again. "That person, Mama, is you." The passage opened into a cavern so vast that Amara's voice echoed for what seemed like minutes, when she gasped in wonder, the sound bouncing off walls that sparkled with veins of gold running through the stone like lightning frozen in time. Massive stalactites hung from the ceiling like the teeth of some slumbering giant, each one carved with symbols that seemed to shift and change when she wasn't looking directly at them, telling stories in a language that her heart understood, even though her mind could not translate the meaning. At the center of the chamber stood 7 pillars, each one taller than the baobab tree above, and each one humming with an energy that made her unborn child dance with excitement in her womb. "Each pillar represents a virtue that our people have cherished since the beginning of time," the voice explained, its tone filled with the reverence of a priest describing sacred relics. "Courage, wisdom, compassion, justice, humility, perseverance, and love. You must touch each one and prove that these virtues live within your heart, or the treasure will remain forever beyond your reach." The first pillar, glowing with the fierce red of a warrior's spirit, tested her courage by showing her visions of every failure, every moment of weakness, every time she had wanted to give up and surrender to despair. Amara felt the weight of her fears pressing down on her like a mountain, threatening to crush her beneath their terrible gravity. But she pressed her palm against the burning stone and spoke the truth that lived in her bones. "I have been afraid, Yes, but I am here. I have been broken, yes, but I did not stay broken. Fear has been my companion, but it has never been my master. The pillar's light shifted from red to gold, and a warmth like her mother's embrace flowed through her body, healing wounds she didn't even know existed. The second pillar, glowing with the deep blue of ocean depths, tested her wisdom by presenting her with riddles that seemed impossible to solve, questions about the nature of truth and the price of knowledge. But as she placed her hand on the cool stone, she realized that wisdom was not about having all the answers, but about understanding which questions were worth asking. "I do not know everything," she said aloud, her voice growing stronger with each word. "But I know the difference between what glitters and what has true value, between what is temporary and what endures." One by one, she passed each test, her unborn child offering guidance and encouragement, until all 7 pillars blazed with golden light that seemed to fill every corner of the vast chamber. As the last pillar's light reached its crescendo, the chamber floor began to tremble and crack, revealing beneath the stone a river of liquid gold that flowed with the sound of 1,000 singing voices, each note pure and clear as crystal bells ringing in harmony across the sacred space. The river stretched from wall to wall, its surface rippling with reflections that showed not Amara's current face, worn and weathered by hardship, but glimpses of the powerful, radiant woman she was destined to become. Along the banks of this impossible river, golden flowers bloomed and swayed in a breeze that carried the scents of jasmine and frankincense, while butterflies with wings like beaten gold danced in spirals that seemed to spell out messages in languages older than recorded history. "This is the river of transformation," her child explained, its voice now resonating with the wisdom of ages. "Every drop contains not just gold, but the condensed dreams and hopes of our ancestors, their accumulated prayers for a better future for their descendants. To drink from it is to accept not just wealth, but responsibility, the sacred duty to use this gift for the betterment of our people." Amara knelt beside the flowing treasure, cupping her hands to lift the molten gold to her lips, expecting it to burn or poison her, but instead finding that it tasted like honey mixed with starlight, like the first rain after a long drought, like her mother's milk when she was a child hungry for comfort. As the golden liquid flowed down her throat, she felt her body changing not in appearance but in essence, as if every cell was being rewritten with a new purpose, a new strength, a new understanding of her place in the grand tapestry of existence. The exhaustion that had weighed her down for months lifted like morning fog, replaced by an energy that seemed to connect her to every living thing in the world above. Her unborn child stirred with what felt like joy, and suddenly she could see through its eyes, perceiving layers of reality that had been invisible to her before. The golden threads that connected every person to their ancestors, the shimmering pathways of possibility that stretched out from every choice, the vast network of love and hope and determination that held the world together, despite all its apparent brokenness. "Now you understand, Mama," the voice whispered with profound satisfaction. "You are no longer just a poor woman cast out into the world. You are a guardian of ancient wisdom, a keeper of sacred treasures, a bridge between what was and what could be. The gold is just the beginning." The baobab's ancient bark felt warm beneath Amara's trembling palm, pulsing with a life force that seemed to recognize her touch and welcome her home. As her fingers traced the deep grooves and scars that told the story of countless storms weathered and seasons survived, the tree began to respond in ways that defied everything she thought she knew about the natural world. A soft golden light emanated from within the trunk, growing brighter with each passing moment, and the ground beneath the massive roots began to shift and separate, revealing a staircase carved from living stone that spiraled down into the earth's mysterious depths. "This is it, Mama," the voice of her child whispered with reverence that made her soul tremble. "This is the gateway our ancestors used to travel between the world of the living and the realm of infinite possibility. Many have searched for it, few have found it, none have been deemed worthy to enter. Until now." As Amara descended the glowing steps, the walls around her came alive with moving paintings that seemed to breathe and dance in the golden light. She saw her great-great-grandmother, Yemi, a woman of legendary beauty and wisdom, leading a group of villagers through These same passages during the Great Drought of 47. She watched in awe as the images showed Yemi, discovering chambers filled with gold so pure it seemed to capture and reflect the very essence of sunlight. Enough wealth to feed and clothe every person in a dozen villages for 100 years. But the most incredible revelation came when she saw what had become of that treasure. How Yemi had used it not for personal gain, but to establish schools and hospitals, to dig wells in parched lands, and to build bridges between warring tribes. Your ancestor was chosen by the spirits to be a keeper of this sacred wealth, her unborn child explained, its voice now carrying the weight of ancient knowledge. But when the colonizers came with their guns and greed, she hid the treasure and bound it with powerful magic, decreeing that only one of her bloodline, proven worthy through great suffering and unwavering faith, could claim it again. That person, Mama, is you. When Amara emerged from the baobab's hidden passages, she found the world transformed around her, or perhaps it was her own perception that had changed so dramatically that reality itself seemed reborn. In her hands, she carried a small gourd that Yemi had given her. Simple clay decorated with symbols that seemed to shift and dance when viewed from the corner of her eye. But when she opened it, golden coins poured forth like water from an endless spring, each one bearing the image of the baobab tree, and inscribed with words in ancient Yoruba that translated to, "For the children of tomorrow." The sun was setting as she made her way back toward Lagos, but instead of the exhaustion and despair that had driven her from the city, she walked with purpose and power, her unborn child providing guidance that helped her navigate not just the physical pathways, but the complex web of opportunities and challenges that lay ahead. "Remember, Mama," the voice cautioned as the city lights came into view, "wealth without wisdom is destruction, and power without compassion is tyranny. Every decision you make from this moment forward will echo through generations." Her first test came sooner than expected, as she approached the garbage dump where she had spent her darkest hours just days before. There, huddled against a makeshift shelter built from corrugated metal and plastic sheeting, she found Mama Kimi, an elderly woman whose husband had abandoned her when arthritis made her hands too stiff to continue her work as a seamstress, whose children had scattered to distant cities and forgotten her existence, whose days were spent collecting bottles and cans to trade for enough money to buy rice and palm oil. The old woman looked up as Amara approached, recognition flickering in eyes that had seen too much suffering, and whispered, "Sister, have you come to join me in this place of forgotten people?" Instead of answering with words, Amara knelt beside Mama Kemi and opened her magical gourd, watching the old woman's face transform from resignation to amazement as golden coins spilled into her weathered palms. "This is not charity," Amara explained, her voice carrying new authority even as her heart remained tender with compassion. "This is recognition of your worth, investment in your wisdom, payment for all the years society failed to honor your contributions. Use this gold to reclaim your dignity, to secure your future, and if you choose, to help others who find themselves forgotten in the shadows of progress." As Mama Kemi wept tears of gratitude and relief, Amara felt her unborn child's approval like a warm embrace, and she understood that this moment was not just about helping one person, but about establishing a pattern of how wealth could be transformed into healing. Word of Amara's miraculous transformation spread through Lagos like wildfire through dried grass, carrying with it whispers of magic and mystery that captured the imagination of everyone from street sweepers to bank presidents. But it also attracted the attention of forces far darker and more dangerous than simple curiosity or envy. Chief Olamide Adebayo, a man whose wealth came from oil contracts secured through corruption, and whose power rested on keeping others powerless, had built his empire by ensuring that opportunities remained scarce and hope remained dim for the masses who might otherwise challenge his dominion. When his network of informants brought him news of a woman who seemed to have unlimited access to gold, who was using that gold to empower the very people he worked to suppress, his response was swift and merciless. "Find this woman," he commanded. His lieutenant, a scarred man whose loyalty was purchased with blood money and maintained through fear. "Find her and bring me everything she has. If she will not surrender her treasure willingly, then we will take it by force and eliminate any threat she might pose to the natural order of things. But Amara was no longer the vulnerable woman who had been cast into the streets to face starvation and despair. Her child's wisdom had awakened abilities within her that transcended the physical world, allowing her to perceive the malevolent intentions swirling around her like smoke from a poison fire, to recognize the faces of those who would harm her before they themselves understood their own plans. When Chief Adebayo's men surrounded the small hotel where she had taken refuge, expecting to find a frightened woman clutching whatever trinkets she had managed to accumulate, they instead found themselves facing someone whose presence filled the room with an authority that made their weapons feel heavy in their hands and their threats stick in their throats like swallowed stones. "I know who sent you," Amara said, her voice calm as a mountain lake but carrying undertones that made the windows vibrate in their frames. "Tell your master that the days of stealing from the poor to feed the rich are numbered. Tell him that the ancestors have awakened, and they are not pleased with how their children's inheritance has been squandered." As she spoke, the golden light that had first appeared in the baobab's depths began to emanate from her skin, not blinding or burning, but revealing the truth of each man's heart with such clarity that several of them dropped their weapons and fled, unable to face the reflection of their own corruption. The unborn child's voice whispered through the chaos, "This is only the beginning, Mama. Chief Adebayo will not stop until he possesses what we have, or until he destroys us in the attempt. But remember, darkness cannot exist where light chooses to shine." Chief Adebayo's response to his men's failure was to escalate his attack from the physical realm to the battlefield of public opinion, using his connections with corrupt media outlets and purchased politicians to launch a campaign designed to destroy Amara's reputation before her influence could spread too far beyond his control. Television broadcasts questioned the source of her wealth, suggesting connections to drug cartels or foreign enemies, while newspaper editorials warned about the dangers of unrealistic expectations and irresponsible promises that could destabilize the delicate balance of society. Social media accounts created by his cyber warfare team spread doctored photographs and fabricated testimonies, painting Amara as either a fraud preying on desperate people or a dangerous radical, whose generosity was a cover for subversive political activities. But for every lie they spread, Amara's actions created 10 truths that couldn't be denied or distorted, and her unborn child's guidance helped her navigate the treacherous waters of public relations with the skill of someone who had been born understanding how power and perception intertwined. Rather than defending herself against the attacks, Amara chose to let her work speak louder than her words, using the endless flow of gold from her magical gourd to create visible, undeniable changes that transformed entire communities overnight. She purchased the slum where Mama Kemi lived and converted it into a clean, safe housing development where families could live with dignity while paying rent they could actually afford. She established mobile medical clinics that traveled to remote villages where children had never seen a doctor, providing not just treatment but training for local healers who could continue the work after the clinics moved on. Most powerfully of all, she created the Amara Academy for African Excellence, a school that combined traditional wisdom with modern technology, where students learned not just mathematics and science, but also the history and culture that had been systematically erased from their educational experience. Each success generated its own momentum, as grateful parents and healed patients and empowered students became living testimonies to the reality of transformation that no amount of propaganda could obscure. "Truth," her child whispered as they watched thousands of people gathering for the Academy's opening ceremony, "is like water in a drought. Even the smallest drop becomes precious beyond measure, and once people taste it, they will never again be satisfied with lies." The crowd that day included not just those who had benefited directly from Amara's generosity, but also journalists whose integrity couldn't be bought, politicians whose conscience couldn't be silenced, and ordinary citizens whose hope had been rekindled by witnessing impossible things becoming beautifully, tangibly real. On the night when Amara's transformation reached its 1-month anniversary, she was awakened not by the usual gentle stirring of her child, but by a presence so powerful, it seemed to fill her small room with the weight of eternity itself. Yemi appeared before her, but this time the ancestor's expression carried warning rather than celebration, and the golden light that surrounded her flickered with shadows that spoke of approaching danger, more terrible than anything Chief Adebayo could devise with mere human malice. "My daughter," Yemi said, her voice carrying the gravity of storm clouds gathering on the horizon, "you have used the sacred treasure wisely and well, but there are forces stirring that exist beyond the realm of earthly politics and petty human greed. The river of gold you drank from was bound by ancient agreements, protected by spiritual laws that demand balance in all things. For every blessing you bestow, the universe demands an equivalent test of your worthiness to continue wielding such power." As Yemi spoke, the walls of the room seemed to dissolve, revealing a vision that made Amara's blood turn cold in her veins. A council of spirits, some radiant with benevolent light, others wreathed in shadows that seemed to consume hope itself. All of them focused on her with an intensity that made her feel like an insect beneath a magnifying glass. "The Council of Eternal Judgment," Yemi explained, her form beginning to fade as dawn approached, "has been watching your actions, measuring your heart, evaluating whether you deserve to continue as a guardian of the ancestors' legacy. 3 tests await you, each more difficult than the last, each designed to reveal whether power has corrupted your spirit or strengthened your resolve to serve others. The first test will challenge your compassion. You will be forced to choose between saving someone you love and serving the greater good. The second will test your wisdom. You will face a decision where all choices lead to suffering, and you must choose which path causes the least harm. The third will measure your humility. When you possess the power to remake the world according to your vision, will you remember that you are still human, still fallible, still dependent on divine grace? As the vision faded and normal reality reasserted itself, Amara felt her unborn child moving restlessly, its voice tinged with concern for the first time since their journey began. "Mama," it whispered, "the tests are beginning now. Chief Adebayo was just the warm-up, a way for the universe to see how you handle simple human opposition. What comes next will challenge not just your resources, but the very core of who you are becoming." The first test arrived disguised as a medical emergency that shattered Amara's heart into fragments sharper than broken glass. Mama Kemi, the elderly woman whose life had been the first transformed by the magical gold, collapsed during what should have been a routine visit to the new community health clinic, her heart failing so suddenly that the doctors could only shake their heads and speak in whispers about hours rather than days. But at the same moment, across the city in the pediatric ward of the hospital Amara had just finished funding, a ward full of children suffering from a rare disease was facing a crisis of their own. The experimental treatment that could save their lives had arrived, but it required resources and expertise that could only be obtained by liquidating the emergency fund that had been set aside for exactly the kind of individual crisis Mama Kemi represented. The cruel mathematics of the situation were inescapable. She could save the woman who had become like a mother to her, or she could save dozens of children whose parents looked at her with eyes full of desperate hope. But the magical gold, for all its apparent endlessness, could not bend the laws of time and space to make both rescues possible simultaneously. As Amara sat in the hospital corridor, her hands pressed against her swollen belly, as if she could somehow draw strength from the child within, the weight of Solomon's wisdom settled on her shoulders, like a mantle of molten lead. Her unborn child remained silent, refusing to provide guidance for a decision that had to come from her own heart, her own understanding of what it meant to be truly responsible for others' lives and futures. She thought of Mama Kemi's weathered hands teaching her to weave baskets during their brief time together, sharing stories of a childhood spent walking miles to fetch water and working in fields under the blazing sun. And she thought of the children she had visited just yesterday, their faces bright with intelligence and curiosity, despite the illness ravaging their small bodies. Their dreams of becoming doctors and teachers and engineers still shining in eyes that had seen too much pain, too early. The decision, when it came, arrived not as a flash of inspiration but as a slow, terrible recognition of truth. Mama Kemi had lived her life, had raised her children, had contributed to the world in ways both small and significant. While the children had barely begun to discover who they might become, with tears streaming down her face, Amara authorized the transfer of funds that would save the pediatric ward, while ensuring that Mama Kemi's final hours were filled with every comfort and dignity that love could provide. As the old woman's hand grew cold in hers, Mama Kemi's final words were a whisper of gratitude. "You chose correctly, daughter. The children need tomorrow more than I need today." The golden light that appeared around the dying woman's body told Amara that she had passed the first test, but the cost of that victory felt like losing a piece of her own soul. The second test came wearing the face of prosperity itself, arriving in the form of a delegation from the World Bank, offering Amara an opportunity that could transform not just her mission, but the entire economic landscape of Africa. They presented her with documents that outlined a partnership worth billions of dollars, funding that could establish her foundation as the primary driver of development across the continent, resources that could build universities and hospitals and infrastructure projects that would lift millions from poverty within a single generation. But buried in the complex legal language was a requirement that made her stomach turn with revulsion. To access the funding, she would have to agree to mining concessions that would destroy the sacred forests where dozens of communities had lived for centuries, displacing indigenous peoples whose connection to the land ran deeper than law or economics could measure. The representatives spoke in smooth, reasonable tones about necessary sacrifices and the greater good, using statistics and projections to paint a picture of utilitarian mathematics that made the destruction of traditional ways of life seem like a reasonable price for modernization. Amara spent 3 sleepless nights, wrestling with the implications of each possible choice, her unborn child offering perspectives that illuminated the complexity without simplifying the moral weight of the decision. "If you take their money," the voice explained during one midnight conversation, "you can save hundreds of thousands of people from disease and ignorance and premature death. But you will destroy the spiritual foundation that makes life meaningful for thousands of others. If you refuse their offer, those who could be saved will continue to suffer while you search for alternatives that may not exist. But the sacred places will remain, intact for future generations who might find in them the wisdom we have." Lost, the choice was made more agonizing by visits to both the slums where children died from preventable diseases in the forest, villages where elders maintained traditions that connected them to truths older than civilization itself. In the end, Amara's decision came from recognizing that true wisdom lay not in choosing the lesser evil, but in refusing to accept that evil choices were inevitable. She rejected the World Bank's offer and instead announced a new initiative that would take longer and require more creativity, but would honor both immediate needs and long-term spiritual health. A network of partnerships with ethical investors and traditional communities that would fund development while preserving cultural integrity. The process would be slower, messier, more uncertain than the straightforward destruction offered by the bank, but it would be built on foundations that could support genuine prosperity, rather than the hollow prosperity that left people richer in possessions but poorer in spirit. As she signed documents establishing the new partnership framework, the golden light returned to confirm that she had passed the second test. But she also understood that the hardest challenge still lay ahead. The third test arrived not as an external challenge, but as an internal transformation that began when Amara's child was born under a full moon that seemed to pause in its journey across the sky to witness the emergence of this long-prophesied soul. The labor was unlike anything the experienced midwives had encountered, not because of its difficulty, but because of its transcendence. The room filled with golden light that pulsed in rhythm with Amara's contractions, and voices speaking in ancient languages whispered prayers and blessings that seemed to emanate from the very walls. When the child finally emerged, he did so with eyes that held the accumulated wisdom of ages, and the first sound he made was not a cry but a laugh of pure joy that made everyone present weep with inexplicable happiness. But the moment Amara held her son, whom she named Adeolu, meaning crown brings honor, she felt a surge of power so vast it made her previous abilities seem like candle flames compared to the sun. And with that power came a terrible temptation that struck at the very core of her transformed identity. She could feel the golden threads that connected every person on Earth, could perceive the levers of influence that would allow her to reshape civilization itself, could envision a world where poverty and injustice were not just reduced, but eliminated entirely through the application of her enhanced abilities. The temptation was not to use her power for evil, but to use it too completely for good, to become the benevolent dictator whose wisdom was so superior to ordinary human judgment that democracy itself became obsolete, whose intervention in every crisis became so efficient that people forgot how to solve their own problems, whose protection became so comprehensive that growth and learning became impossible. "I could end all suffering," she whispered to her newborn son as the golden light pulsed around them both. "I could make every decision correctly, could prevent every war, could ensure that every child grows up safe and loved and educated. Why should I allow ignorance and hatred and cruelty to continue when I have the power to stop them?" But as she spoke these words, she saw in Adeolu's ancient eyes not approval, but sadness, and she heard in the silence that followed her question an answer more profound than any voiced response. Because a world without the possibility of making wrong choices would also be a world without the possibility of genuine virtue. Because love that was compelled rather than freely given would not be love at all. Because the very struggles she could eliminate were also the crucibles in which human character was forged and strengthened. The final test was not about what she could do with unlimited power, but about what she chose not to do. Not about proving her strength, but about demonstrating her wisdom in restraining that strength to preserve the dignity and agency of others. As she kissed her son's forehead and whispered her promise to use her gifts as a servant rather than a master, the golden light settled into a steady glow that would remain with them both for the rest of their days, marking them not as rulers of the world but as guardians of its potential. 20 years later, as Amara stood before the United Nations General Assembly to deliver her farewell address as the first African Secretary General in the organization's history, she reflected on the journey that had transformed her from a desperate woman kicked into the streets to a leader whose influence had helped reshape the global conversation about dignity, development, and the true meaning of wealth. The Amara Foundation had grown into a network that spanned every continent, but its true success was measured not in dollars distributed or buildings constructed, but in the millions of people who had discovered their own capacity for creating change, who had learned to see themselves not as victims of circumstances, but as active participants in the ongoing creation of a more just and compassionate world. Her son Adeolu, now a young man whose wisdom exceeded his years, had chosen to decline the positions of power that his unique gifts could have easily secured. Instead, working as a teacher in the rural villages where his mother's journey had begun, helping children understand that their dreams were not limited by the circumstances of their birth. The speech Amara delivered that day became known as the Golden Wisdom Address, not because of its eloquence, but because of its fundamental message about the relationship between material resources and spiritual wealth. "I was once told by my unborn child," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the vast assembly hall, "that I was not magic, but simply what happened when love and determination joined forces with divine purpose. Today I tell you that none of us are magic, but all of us are miracles waiting to be awakened." The gold that transformed my life was never about the metal itself. It was about remembering that every human being carries within them treasures more valuable than anything that can be mined from the earth. She spoke of the sacred responsibility that came with abundance, whether that abundance was measured in money or knowledge or influence, or simply the gift of another day of life. She shared stories of the communities that had thrived, not because she had given them wealth, but because she had helped them recognize the wealth they already possessed in their traditions, their resilience, their capacity for mutual support and collective wisdom. As she concluded her address, Amara's hands rested on her belly, where another child grew, a daughter who would carry forward the legacy in ways not yet imagined, whose voice had already begun to whisper guidance about challenges that lay decades in the future. "The ancestors who guided me taught me that true wealth is not what we accumulate for ourselves, but what we leave behind for those who come after us. Not what we hoard in fear, but what we share in love. Not what we use to separate ourselves from others, but what we use to build bridges across every divide that human ignorance has created. The standing ovation that followed lasted for nearly 10 minutes, but Amara barely heard it. Her attention focused instead on the golden light that danced around her daughter in the womb, and the voice that whispered, "The next chapter begins now. Mama, the next chapter begins now." The baobab tree where her journey had started still stood on its hill outside Lagos, its roots still guarding the entrance to mysteries beyond human understanding. But now children from around the world came to visit it, drawn by stories of transformation and possibility, each one carrying in their hearts the seed of their own magnificent becoming. In the years that followed, scholars would debate whether Amara's story was literally true or metaphorically profound, whether the gold had been magical or simply symbolic of the resources that became available when someone finally believed deeply enough in their own worth to claim them. But for the millions whose lives had been touched by her work, the question of magic versus reality was irrelevant. What mattered was the truth that her life had proven, that no one is too poor, too forgotten, too cast aside to become an agent of transformation in the world. What mattered was the understanding that every ending could become a beginning. Every exile could become a journey toward home. Every broken dream could become the foundation for something more beautiful than what had been lost. And somewhere in the golden depths beneath an ancient tree, the river of transformation continued to flow, waiting for the next worthy soul to discover that the treasure they sought had been within them all along, waiting for the courage to believe, the wisdom to serve, and the humility to remember that in lifting others, we ourselves are lifted to heights we never dared imagine possible. If you enjoyed this powerful story of transformation and hope, please like this video, subscribe to Africanfolktales for more incredible African folk tales that will touch your heart and inspire your soul, and share this story with your loved ones who need to remember that miracles are always possible. Tell us in the comment section below, where are you watching from? We love connecting with our global family of storytelling enthusiasts from every corner of the world.